Why are American citizens expressing support for Putin in the upcoming US presidential election? The West has finally realized who can save the world. The upcoming presidential election promises a predictable outcome. The West also realizes this, but they are gnashing their teeth with impotent anger, realizing that in the next 6 years the vector of Russia's development will remain unchanged. And during this time there is a significant probability that prosperous Europe will face only memories, and the future of the USA is in serious doubt. It all started in 2000, when Putin took the helm in Russia. Western publications received the appointment with great interest and mostly respect. The European press raved that Putin was a man capable of bringing order to Russia and improving relations with Europe. It was especially emphasized that under Putin, Russia, cooperating with the West, had successfully countered growing terrorism. Even the British admired his erudition, environmental protection, knowledge of Dostoevsky and fine taste in expensive French wines. However, everything changed after Putin's speech in Munich in 2007. Delight was replaced by fear and hatred. Putin declared that a unipolar world was no longer possible and that NATO was moving towards Russia's borders, forcing it to respond to the challenge. This speech was a call for the West to start living in peace and harmony, respecting other countries. However, this call was underestimated and was immediately interpreted as a return to the Cold War and a challenge to the entire free world. From that moment on, a targeted propaganda against Russia in the West began. Still, in the same year, the American edition of Time recognized Putin as the Man of the Year, forcing him to admit that he had returned Russia to the ranks of world leaders. The Time cover photo is probably familiar to many, as it has been used by many as an avatar. As soon as Vladimir Putin came to power, interest in the West in him was genuine. As the president of the largest country on the planet, and on top of that he took it in such a poor state. Many watched with interest how the new leader of the country, which the West had already buried for itself, would act. However, Putin remained a dark horse for the Western establishment. The first attempt to look into the mysterious Russian soul of the Russian president was made by the German publication Der Spiegel in 2000. At that time, the publication issued an extensive publication, placing Putin's photo on the cover. Later, Putin would be a frequent guest on the covers and spreads of foreign publications. It is now understood why Putin is so hated by the West. The fact is that the Western establishment had no part in the appointment of the new Russian president, which still makes those sitting behind the big puddle bite their elbows. What came over Boris Nikolaevich that year? But Yeltsin appointed Putin without coordinating his candidacy with Washington. This will be revealed later, when the negotiations between Bill Clinton and Yeltsin are declassified. So it is not surprising that Putin is still a mystery. The West simply knew nothing about him. And at the same time, there is an opinion, common among ordinary people, that it was the West that created Putin's image. And this is by no means an erroneous judgment. After all, it is the Western media over the past decades have been paying so much attention to Putin that his figure has gained popularity all over the world, and even the most backward Papuan in New Guinea will not hesitate to give the right answer to the question of who is Putin. Not only that, there is even a science devoted to our leader, Putinology. Its followers analyze Putin's behavior, his facial expressions, speech, gestures, habits, and then give their verdict to the general public, abundantly seasoned with knowingly false information. Why ordinary Americans in the United States want Putin for president? The West has finally realized who is capable of saving the world. The presidential election is ahead, the result of which is predictable. The West also realizes this, and they gnash their teeth in impotent anger, because they understand perfectly well that in the next 6 years the vector of Russia's development will remain unchanged. And during these 6 years, there is a high probability that only memories will remain of prosperous Europe, and the future fate of the United States is very doubtful. But how it all began. When in 2000 Putin took the reins of power in his hands, Western publications took this appointment with genuine interest and most of them treated the new president of the Russian Federation with respect. The European press was abuzz with stories that Putin was the man who could finally restore order in Russia and mend relations with Europe. All the more so because it was under Putin that Russia, taking hand in hand with the West, began to confront terrorism, which in those years was on the rise. Even the British admired his erudition and broad-mindedness. Vladimir Putin was an ardent environmentalist, a connoisseur of Dostoevsky, and a fine connoisseur of expensive French wines. Indeed, after Yeltsin, who was always in a frenzy, Putin did make an impression. Everything changed after Vladimir Putin made his famous speech in Munich in 2007. Delight was replaced by fear and hatred literally in an instant. Then Vladimir Vladimirovich directly stated that the unipolar world is no longer possible, and NATO, its advancement to Russia's borders, will force it to respond to the challenge. Let us recall the key theses uttered in Munich. In general, the then speech of Vladimir Putin was a kind of call for the West to finally begin to live in peace and harmony, treating with respect for other countries. But no one appreciated this call, and everyone immediately cried out that Putin was returning to the Cold War, challenging the entire free world. It was from that moment that the targeted propaganda directed against Russia began its countdown. However, this did not prevent the American publication Time from recognizing the Russian president as the Man of the Year in the same year. The West was forced to recognize that Vladimir Putin has managed to return the Russian Federation to the number of leaders who rule the world. Everyone must have seen the Time cover photo, because in those years many people even put it on their avatar. As soon as Vladimir Putin came to power, the interest in the West in him was genuine. He was the president of the largest country on the planet, and in addition, he took it in such a poor state. Many watched with interest how the new leader of the country, which the West had already buried for itself, would act. However, Putin remained a dark horse for the Western establishment. The first attempt to look into the mysterious Russian soul of the Russian president was made by the German publication Der Spiegel in 2000. At that time, the publication issued an extensive publication with Putin's photo on the cover. The article carried the headline, "Who is Putin? The New Russian Alliance of KGB and Capital." Later, Putin would be a frequent guest on the covers and spreads of foreign publications. It is now understood why Putin is so hated by the West. The fact is that the Western establishment had no part in the appointment of the new Russian president, which still makes those sitting behind the big puddle bite their elbows. What came over Boris Nikolaevich that year? But Yeltsin appointed Putin without coordinating his candidacy with Washington. This will be revealed later, when the negotiations between Bill Clinton and Yeltsin are declassified. So it is not surprising that Putin is still a mystery. The West simply knew nothing about him. And at the same time, there is an opinion, common among ordinary people, that it was the West that created Putin's image. And this is by no means an erroneous judgment. After all, it is the Western media over the past decades have been paying so much attention to Putin that his figure has gained popularity all over the world, and even the most backward Papuan in New Guinea will not hesitate to give the right answer to the question of who is Putin. Not only that, there is even a science devoted to our leader, Putinology. Its followers analyze Putin's behavior, his facial expressions, speech, gestures, habits, and then give their verdict to the general public, abundantly seasoning it with knowingly false information. And this science is not just a hobby of some fanatics. Not at all. It is more than 20 years old, and its boom came during Trump's election to the presidency. Surely everyone remembers the story of Russia's interference in the independent U.S. elections, in which Putin was assigned the role of Professor Moriarty. There are several main legends in Putinology. All of them were described in one of the articles published by one of the Putinologists. And the most delusional one is that Putin's name is exactly the same as Lenin's, Vladimir. At the same time, for some reason no one was confused by the fact that Vladimir is one of the most popular Russian names. And that apparently the resemblance to the leader of the World Revolution was complete. Putin was assigned the patronymic, Ilyich. These are the experts on the mysterious Russian president, who have not even bothered to read Wikipedia. However, there is nothing surprising in this. The fact is that the Western media, when talking about Putin, often identify him not with modern Russia, but with the defunct Soviet Union. The theory that Vladimir Vladimirovich is none other than the new leader of communism, who is the reincarnation of Joseph Vissarionovich, is very popular in the West. Undoubtedly, such views are echoes of the anti-Soviet propaganda of the Cold War, in which colossal funds were invested. For many years the West perceived our country as bear, accordion, vodka, and the USSR was always considered the embodiment of evil. Therefore, when someone starts talking about Putin's goal of restoring the Soviet Union, Western society is very comfortable for the American establishment, fear and desire to confront the aggressive Russian bear. Therefore, one should not be surprised why the West so eagerly began to provide assistance with money and weapons to Ukraine. The American publication, Washington Post, back in 2016, published a publication in which it was said that Russian President Vladimir Putin is nostalgic for the USSR, and has not abandoned his idea to expand its territories. Almost the entire American establishment agrees with this point of view. For example, in 2021, U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Victoria Nuland said that she was very concerned about Putin's thoughts about the revival of the USSR, which he would like to make his legacy. And before that, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin made a Freudian slip, calling Russia the Soviet Union, talking about the need to protect Ukraine from the aggressor. And no one in the West tries not to remember that this country was once part of the USSR. All this is done for one single purpose: to demonize Putin in the eyes of the world community. And there is nothing easier for the US to do this with a politician who wants to revive the USSR. And the Soviet Union, as we remember, causes subconscious fear in Western society. Therefore, the idea that Russia must be dealt with exclusively from a position of strength is a favorite of the population there. However, in addition to the idea that Putin is Stalin 2.0, there is no less interesting version. This is a somewhat different software. In it, Putin is an autocratic czar of a new model, and Russia, dormant, soaked in conservatism country, where they cannot even understand all the charms of sodomy. By the way, the nickname, Tsar, is very popular in the West and first appeared on the cover of Time back in 2014 after the annexation of Crimea. By the way, this nickname is a favorite of Russian liberals, especially among the Navalny, who at one time voted at rallies. He is not our Tsar, until their leader Alyosha was sent to a place not so remote. By the way, in the same year 2014, the famous Sochi Olympics took place. And once again, Putin was in the center of attention. The Economist published on its cover a collage on which the Russian Tsar was depicted as a figure skater doing a pirouette, and in the background his partner symbolizing Russia, which had gone under the ice. A clear hint at who, in Russia, to live well. In general, the imagination of the Western media can be envied. That's where the creativity is, not like in the clumsy Russian propaganda. They did not portray him as anything but a tanker, a figure skater, a czar, a KGBist, a sailor, and many other things. And pictures of Putin with a bare torso on a bear, what is worth it? True, in this case there was a bummer. Western ladies noted the excellent physical shape of the Russian president, and many even expressed willingness to spend the night with him. However, Putin himself assured the excited ladies that he had never ridden a bear. However, there were moments when Putin was still presented in a favorable light. For example, in 2016, the image of a smiling Vladimir Putin appeared in New York on an advertising billboard for a Volvo car. Most likely, it was the work of hackers, but the case is still very revealing. And on the day when the Russian president turned 65 years old, in many European countries appeared graffiti. For example, in Berlin, Putin was depicted in a chair, sitting surrounded by white doves. The graffiti was accompanied by lines from the EU anthem. And in Paris, Putin's image was accompanied by the inscription, "Happy Birthday, Pacifist." In Barcelona, Spain, the Russian leader winks at passers-by from a drawing with the phrase, "Everyone has the right to self-determination," next to it. And in German Dresden, on the facade of the house where Putin used to live, a 3-meter image was painted, signed, "Peacemaker." By the way, Germans in general like to depict the Russian president with the help of graffiti on fences and walls of houses. Also made a lot of noise released in 2017 documentary, Interview with Putin, filmed by the famous American director Oliver Stone. In the movie, Putin was asked many questions, including about the relationship between the United States and Russia, NATO expansion and the confrontation in Ukraine. At the time, many Western media accused Stone of sycophancy. However, the director himself then stated that he was independent and did not make his films to please the American State Department. Is Putin the President of the United States? And in 2023, an event occurred that put an end to all the efforts of the American establishment. During the presidential election race in the United States, ordinary Americans unexpectedly expressed a desire for Putin to become their president. Moreover, just a year earlier, according to researchers, trust in the Russian president among Western countries reached a critical minimum over the past 20 years. The American thinker published a publication claiming that Putin's popularity is growing among ordinary Americans because they see him as a man who cares about his country and his citizens, so they want exactly the same leader for the United States. Americans see it very well how Biden, despite Putin's warning, continues to climb into Ukraine with asinine stubbornness, not paying attention to the fact that in the end, ordinary citizens will have to pay for all his dubious adventures if it comes to an exchange of nuclear strikes. Joseph himself and his family will take refuge in a bunker. And then the former comedian adds fuel to the fire, scaring the American population with predictions that the United States will be forced to send its children to certain death in order to protect the Baltic members of the alliance from Russian aggression, if Ukraine will be defeated. At the same time, right-wing Republicans express their categorical disagreement with the help Washington is providing to Kyiv and openly declare that Biden, through his actions, has brought the world to the threshold of a third world war. It is worth noting that today among the European establishment there is beginning to be a common opinion that the West itself fucked up Russia, because at one time it did not listen and did not want to understand Putin, who warned how it would all end. This was also stated by the advisor to the former German Chancellor Horst Teltschik. The advisor directly accused the current government of alienating Russia. According to Teltschik, the Russian president expressed his readiness to get closer to Europe at the very beginning of the 2000s, but it never met halfway. Even the stubborn British are beginning to understand that the West itself provoked Russia, driving it into a corner. At the same time, all you hear from everywhere are accusations of aggression, and no one wants to take a defensive position into account. However, no one stopped the British from choosing the right path for developing relations with Russia, but what's done is done. Experts who voice such thoughts out loud are certainly right, but the problem is that they came to these conclusions too late. Today, Bismarck's famous phrase, "Russia takes a long time to harness, but travels quickly," is more relevant than ever. The biggest mistake of the West is that they were quick to write off Russia immediately after the collapse of the USSR. They missed the moment when the world changed dramatically. Russia unexpectedly showed its teeth and categorically refused to fall apart, following the example of the USSR. At the helm of the Russian state is a strong leader who has mixed all the cards of the Westerners and is now not in the role of a supplicant, but in the role of a party dictating its terms. What will Obama say now, who in 2014 compared Putin to a tired schoolboy in the back desk, and argued that Russia is a regional power?